GPU has landed. Nvidia's RTX 4080 is finally here. But is their latest release a dream for the high-end gamer, or instead have they overdone it with a card that's too expensive and too big? Well, in this video, we're going to find out by building the best RTX 4080 gaming PC that you can assemble right now and putting this card through its paces in more than 15 of the latest titles, comparing it to literally every other GPU option available on the market right now. I'll be guiding you through all the parts to pair with a GPU like this, the new 4080, talking about Nvidia's Founders Edition and all the other options on the market, and just generally building an absolutely bonkers gaming PC. Let's do this. Let's start things off, shall we, by skipping straight to the main event, the actual RTX 4080 GPU itself. I'll come back to all the other components that make this pretty insane build up a little bit later. Those of you who tuned in to our RTX 4090 launch content will notice one thing, one quite big thing. The box for this is exactly the same size. That's right, the 4080 and 4090 boxes are identical, and that's something which carries through to the GPU cooler too. Now, in some respects, this isn't a bad thing, because the 4090 cooler, it did a good job of keeping the 4090 cool, but on the flip side, it's a bad thing because it's absolutely huge. So the 4080, as much as there's lots to see, there's also not really much to see because it's the same as the 4090 in terms of physical dimensions. Obviously, you've got a different GPU silicon chip inside, you've got more memory, you've got different CUDA core and RT core counts, so specs-wise, it's obviously different, but that Ada Lovelace architecture that both cards are, of course, built upon, obviously kicking out some heat. The cooler design, though, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's very similar to the last gen. You've got a fan on the bottom and a fan on the top with almost like a dual chamber design that keeps the card cool in a slightly non-traditional way to what you'll find with add-in board partner cards like those from ASUS, MSI, or this one that we recently received of the 4080 from GeekaWhat. Video on that coming later today. For an even better size comparison, let's take the new 4080 and compare it to last gen's 3080, a card that I'd argue is still one of the best gaming GPUs on the market right now. You'll notice the size difference is staggering. Not only, this is like a bit of GPU gymnastics, not only is the new card much thicker, it's a 3-slot rather than a 2-slot design, it's also longer, it's wider, literally everything about it is bigger. But does bigger actually mean better? That's a question we'll be looking to answer, of course, in the performance later. Couple of bits of spec information for you. You've got just shy of 10,000 CUDA cores with a boost clock of over 2.5 GHz, pretty rapid, 3rd gen RT cores and 4th gen Tensor cores with support for the new improved DLSS 3. We'll talk about that more in the performance section later, and 16 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory. At this point of the video, it would be appropriate to just quickly touch upon the elephant in the room. It's a red elephant, and quite a big one at that, or a small one by comparison to this. It is, of course, AMD's newly announced RX 7900 XT and XTX. Make no mistake, the price that these cards are positioned puts them in direct competition with not only the 4090, but the cheaper 4080. Of course, we can't say too much more about those AMD GPUs yet, but should you wait to see how they stack up against this before buying? Probably. But this should still be a solid card, and I would expect these to compete against each other, but as I say, only time really will tell. Now, specs and so aside, how should you actually go about configuring a build for the RTX 4080? With the 3080 from last gen, you can even get away with pairing it up with like a Ryzen 5 5600X. You saw minimal bottlenecking, but not really much. That's not the case anymore. A card like this is going to provide you way more performance than the last generation, and as such, you've got to upgrade your CPU just a little bit to actually make sure you can meet those requirements. In my very unassuming black paper box, you'll find a Core i7-13700K, my recommended CPU for the 4080. I'm going to be doing some bottleneck testing with the new i5 13th Gen 2, because that's an i5 that punches well above its class. But if you're spending, $1,000 on a graphics card, more than that, you want to make sure you've got a good CPU. The i9 would also be good from Intel's 13th gen, but it's going to be overkill if all you're doing is gaming. And AMD's Ryzen 7000 will also work well, however, I would prefer Intel, given some of the testing we've put together here and on our website, GeekaWhat.com. You can read a full rationale of why we prefer 13th gen in most instances at the first links in the description below. With 16 cores, 8 performance and 8 efficiency, and 24 threads, this thing is rapid. Boost clock speeds of well over 5 GHz too, 2. One of the reasons I love 13th gen over Ryzen particularly is because of motherboards like this. Not specifically the ASUS TUF Wi-Fi Gaming Edition board, but because you can still use DDR4 memory in some instances. You won't see any performance hit. If anything, DDR4 can perform better than DDR5 because the latencies are still so much lower. Now, the ASUS TUF lineup is really solid for a number of ways and gives us access to next-gen tech like PCIe Gen 5, even though, of course, our graphics card is still only PCIe Generation 4. Building a system with a 4080 like this, I wouldn't expect you to be holding onto this motherboard for the next 5-6 years, and if you do, you're not really going to have changed the graphics card in that time. You get all the important bits, including the LGA 1700 socket for any of the new 13th gen or last gen 12th gen processors, DDR4 memory support on our 4 RAM DIMMs, your M.2 slots, of which you get PCIe Gen 5 for next gen SSDs, and then if we take a swizz round to the rear I.O. just here, you'll find 2.5 gigabit Ethernet for faster networking, you'll find 20 gigabit USB-C and 10 gigabit USB-C respectively, and Wi-Fi 6. Another one that's nice to have is optical audio for a high-end build. Say that you want to plug this up to a TV for some, weekend gaming. In a title less sensitive to input lag, being able to plug up to an awesome sound system is a nice bonus and saves you spending any money later on. If you're still a little unsure about the motherboard though and are interested in which are our favourite Z790 and Z690 designs, check out the link in the cards now to our full buyer's guides over on GeekaWhat.com. While I'm here, I'm also going to pop in the RAM I picked up for this build, a 32GB kit of Corsair's Vengeance RGB Pro DDR4. 3600MHz, low latency, affordable price point, and of course Corsair IQ support makes it an awesome kit for this system. Can't get the RAM in, it's too fiddly today. It's not actually normally that difficult to install memory, you've just got to line it up and make sure it fits. Don't try and install DDR5 memory in a DDR4 motherboard, as I maybe just did, having spent the last 5 minutes talking about how great this DDR4 board is, as it physically does not fit.
3:28 a.m.
Ah, DDR5 memory.
Oh, it's DDR4. We'll cut it out. It was the way you put it in and then pause.
While I'm here, I'm also going to add in my storage, a 2TB WD Black SN850X. At read speeds of up to 7.3 gigabytes a second makes it an awesome choice. Do not use a Gen 3 drive for this build. Make sure you get a drive with 5 or 6 gigabytes per second minimum. That can bottleneck the new graphics cards unbelievably. And the very last thing that you want to do is spend a whole heap of money on a high-end GPU, only to bottleneck it because you scrimped out just a little bit on your storage. Don't make that mistake. Capacity-wise, my advice would just be to basically buy what you can afford. I would say though that a 2TB drive in a build like this, kind of a sweet spot. 500 gigs, not enough anymore, and 1TB does fill up pretty quickly once you've added even just a few titles onto it. And with that all done, the motherboard assembly is complete. I've finished basically the first 3 or 4 steps of my build today. The next obvious step is to move my motherboard into the case. Now, I've gone a bit simple on the case for this build, but something that still looks, I think, really nice is crammed with airflow, crammed with RGB, and ticks all of my proverbial boxes. This is Deepcool CK560 with a really nice magnetic mesh panel, which as you can see integrates Deepcool's kind of design language with airflow. I like it. It's just a really solid fit for what I wanted. It also looks really nice, is available in white. I mean, what more could you want? I'll leave this case and some alternatives though linked down below. I recently did a video actually on my favourite PC cases you can buy right now for the end of 2022 and as we head really into 2023. Where does the time go? I sound like such an old person saying that. My life is flashing before my eyes. I've not built enough PCs yet to die happy. Here we go. Oh, yes. Yes. And more yes. That all fits. A-okay. Absolutely perfectamundo. All that's left to do is to screw this thing into place, which is often a little bit easier said than done. Especially when you use the wrong screws. Too big, Jose, too big. Aha, that's a little bit better. Some cases use the hexagonal PSU screws to install the motherboard, and some don't. This one doesn't. And the last screw, we are in, and we're good to go. I have just had one of those moments though when you build a PC where you go, oh I've forgotten to install any of the CPU cooler. Normally you would do some prep with the motherboard, but it's not the end of the world. Definitely a mountain we can climb over quite easily. Just might be a little bit more fiddly. Now for the i7, it's a chip that doesn't run ludicrously hot, but you wouldn't want to put an air cooler on, to be completely honest with you. Especially as well if we want to overclock it a little bit, ensure we can hit those boost clock speeds of 5.4 gigahertz on this chip. And that is where this Deepcool LS720 comes in. Now this is a 360mm unit from Deepcool. cool. The only real disadvantage I can see compared to other options is that the cooler doesn't have a customizable screen on, but it's still fully RGB, all the fans are RGB, and it's a lot cheaper than those options with the LCDs. Deepcool have got a really good reputation for coolers. I've been using their coolers for years. And as a company, they've actually got some really unique original designs that you might recognize. A couple of things are pretty unique here. They actually include these Deepcool kind of clips for the tubes, which helps you to manage your tubes and keep them exactly how you want. There's integrated thermal paste, and the water block color should actually match pretty perfectly with the graphics card. So I've actually got a nice bit of color coordination going on here, which should look awesome. Their RGB fans are also fantastic. They spin quite fast and quite quiet. And of course, the customizable addressable RGB is really easy to control, and they can be daisy chained together, keeping your cable management to a minimum and preventing sort of a rat's nest of cables at the back of your PC. Now then, although I actually forgot to install the cooler, I don't think that's going to matter too much, because in the box, Deepcool have done all of the work for us for an Intel CPU. Normally you have to like assemble this and the poles and the stoppers. Not with Deepcool. They've prepped that all for us, which is very, very nice of them. And then in here, we have some more goodies. Okay, I'm impressed, Deepcool. This is really simple. Basically, all we need to do is take these metal brackets and we'll pop these on the water block in a moment. But first, we're going to add in the pre-made backplate through the motherboard, add on these black Intel GeekaWhat stoppers to keep the backplate in place, and then pop the water block on top, add in thumb screws on to secure it all in. Really, 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 really simple. Deepcool, very impressed, and aesthetically looks awesome. We can use the 3 extra RGB fans because of course we've already got 3 at the front that can work with the radiator to go at the top and the back to add an RGB touch and save you what, $100 on not having to buy a 3-pack of new RGB fans. Lovely stuff. Very, very happy with how this is turning out. And then the whole thing should just drop into place. Oh yes. Look at that. Now all we need to do is add in really quickly before the backplate sort of sinks out each of the thumb screws. Let's get it binding. Same with the one in the top right. And then let's just make sure we can add one into the top left and the bottom left too for good measure to make sure nothing's going to be moving about. There we go. It was a bit touch and go, but we've got it. All I need to do now is just tighten up all of those screws to make sure, of course, this cooler is going to be nice and tight and make good contact with our Intel i7-13700K. These screws screw forever. So many turns. That's like 10 turns to tighten those from basically 0 to hero. Look at it. Just keeps going. Well, hey, would you just look at that? That's all nice and stable. You can tell because we can basically pick the case up by the cooler, and it's actually strong enough to do that a-okay. Cables and wiring can be run as well to all the appropriate ports, so let's move those out the way. And while I'm here, I might as well install the GPU, which actually requires me to remove the 3rd PCIe lane. That's right, the 4080 is so big, you actually have to take out 3 lanes for it. Back in the day, a triple slot card was unheard of. It was a rarity. Not anymore. Oh, that's so heavy. Go on, in you pop. And then apply a little bit of pressure, and the whole thing is going to clip in nice and easily. You can also see it lines up perfectly for our 3 screws on the end. These are the same screws you'd use for like a power supply installation, for example. And while normally I'd say, you know, 1 screw will do, for our big 4080, I would recommend you add in all 3 screws to stop it from going anywhere. Oh, yes, that looks so clean. Time to just quickly swap those fans in, and then we can finish off the build portion of the video with the power supply. My choice is the Corsair HX1000i. It's an 80 plus platinum power supply. Maybe a tiny bit overkill for this build, but of course, with all the drama around those power connections and power supplies for the 4090, it's better safe than sorry. Also, if you're going to overclock this card and overclock your CPU, having a decent power supply never goes amiss. I mean, the i7's like over 300 watts, 200, high 200 watts in some instances. Plus, of course, then another, 450, 400 for the graphics card. That's 700 already without any of the other components. So this, hopefully, should do the trick nicely. Unfortunately, I do just need to take a bit of time and remove, there's a screw down here, which, if I loosen, should allow us to then pop out this hard drive cage right here. That will give us just that little bit more room for the power supply and also help in terms of airflow from the radiator at the bottom of the case as well. Corsair's HX series, not a small power supply, is probably a word I would use. And once that's all wired up, I can turn the PC on for the first time and see whether or not I've done a good job at getting this thing built, working, and of course we can look at performance. So we've sourced a keyboard, a monitor, a mouse, and even an Xbox controller for some racing games in a moment. But is this PC actually going to turn on first time? My cable management has hopefully been pristine, and a single press of the power button is all we need. Oh, the RAM's lit up, the graphics card's on, everything's spinning. I can even see some RGB on our cheeky little display in the back of our studio, so I know the front performance all working, but are we going to get an image? So far, no signs of life, but the PC, oh, amazing! And we are in. That was super smooth. Absolutely lovely stuff. Let's jump in and play some games and see whether this build and the 4080 in general is really worth this quite hefty price tag.
I just wanna
The first game that I want to try out is the beta DLSS 3 version of Cyberpunk 2077. A game that's been famously difficult to run, but how does the 4080 stack up with that new DLSS 3 tech? Now, DLSS 3 adds an Nvidia frame generation and should hopefully allow us to push our frame rates that bit further. So 4K, full screen, graphics, we've got that DLSS 3.0 enabled, the frame gen is the key bit to look for, and if you scroll through, high and ultra settings throughout, including ray tracing, with every single option toggled, including ultra fidelity. Let's run the benchmark and see what kind of results we can achieve. Now, to be clear, with the 4090, I think we pulled in about 140 FPS, but with DLSS 2.0 on the last generation 3080, you were struggling to hit 60. So for this thing to be so far over 100 FPS is an early promising sign, but let's see if that holds up. Now, Cyberpunk's one of those games, it was released too early. About 2 years ago, I think, at this point, and it was just a game that was just a bit ahead of its time. It needed more powerful hardware and acceleration, and it seems like our 4080 is stacking up really well. 104, 105 FPS on average so far. CPU is sitting at a chilly 56 and our GPU at a chilly 55, so that Founders Edition working very well, despite of course sitting at 97%. Definitely a GPU rather than a CPU bottleneck here. Frame rates jumped up 114, 112, so really solid results overall. DLSS 3 of course helping us here, and something that will set Nvidia cards apart from the upcoming Radeon 7000 series, promising as they might look. But do these results carry over into some other games? Well, I also wanted to test out a little bit of the latest Formula 1 2022, again with DLSS 3. We'll jump into our non-DLSS 3 straight raster tests in just a minute. And here we are in the settings. So we're running at high in terms of our ray tracing. We've got all of that stuff enabled. If we jump into the video mode, we've then got full screen, 4K on our 4080. Frame rate limit is off, so we get the maximum FPS possible. DLSS set to performance mode. Super resolution sharpness at 50. I think we're pretty much good to go. All of these settings should be a-okay. Now, we could at this point jump into the benchmark mode, but I'm not going to. We're going to have a bit more fun, have a solo race. Let's do F1 2022, and let's go to let's give Brazil a go, shall we, in advance of the Formula 1 race this weekend. There can only be one driver for me. And then let's hit start event. Keep an eye on that frame rate counter in the top left. I'm hoping for maybe 120, 130 FPS. But obviously everything is cranked to performance mode and it's raining, which is never good for the frame rate. No, I'm only kidding. It shouldn't make any difference. And here we go. Let's see what kind of frame rates we're able to achieve. It's lights out. The frame rate will start to settle after the start. The conditions, though, in this race today, really not very good. Into the first corner, we're getting eaten alive by everybody. I didn't even look at the frame rate counter for the need of... not concentrating. Oh dear, terrible start. But the frame rate, 164 FPS on average so far. That's not too bad at all. Gameplay looks super smooth. I mean, even if you had a high frame rate, 4K gaming monitor, remember this is maxed out at 4K resolution, you couldn't even see all of the frame rate that this game and this graphics card is, of course, delivering to us. And it's one of those things that really gets me thinking, a bit like Cyberpunk, really. If you can get this sort of performance on a 4080, as expensive as it is to be fair, why would anybody be able to justify the added price of the 4090? And if I'm being really honest with you, these frame rates that I've seen on the 4080 so far leave me just a little bit confused as to why anybody would want to spend that extra $500 or whatever it is on a 4090 if these are the kind of frame rates the 4080 can give you. And maybe I'll be saying exactly the same thing when the 4070 or whatever Nvidia call their 4080 12 gig comes out, because if that can give me, I don't know, 130 FPS at 4K, is that not still more than enough for a game like this? And across the board, really. And these are results that, spoiler alert, we've seen with the 4080 in our more detailed testing. Take a look at the tests we did in Warzone, Modern Warfare 2, Apex and Valorant. In Warzone, to start things off at 4K high settings, the 4080 delivered a strong 155 frames per second on average. To do these kind of frame rates at 4K high was mental and underlines the point I talked about earlier. Why would you possibly need a 4090 when the 4080 can achieve this? It was a similarly positive experience in Apex Legends, where at 4K high settings, our founder's 4080 topped the charts, if not for the more expensive 4090. You can see here 159 FPS at 4K was impressive. This beat out the 6950 XT, which was pretty interesting. Of course, AMD's current top-end GPU, though that is soon to be about to change. In Cyberpunk 2077, we tested with a couple of different settings configs. First at 4K high with DLSS 2.0 enabled. The founder's RTX 4080 pulled an impressive 66 frames per second on average, only falling short to the 4090 and by 2 frames a second to the GeekaWhat Aorus 4080 master model we've also got in to test. Move through to DLSS 3 though, which of course includes Nvidia's new frame generation technology, and here the frame rate skyrocketed to 116 frames per second on average. That's a 44 frames per second difference, and the mileage here was much better. Nvidia's DLSS 3 is very impressive. You really have to see it to believe it. Talking of seeing to believe, in F1 2022, the founder's 4080 pulled in 170 FPS on average at 4K high, falling short to the 4090 by around about 30%, but nevertheless still provided a great gaming experience, and as I say, 170 FPS at 4K can't even be displayed by most monitors anyway. The Founders Edition RTX 4080 also stacked up well in Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, where a CPU bottleneck was certainly at play. 304 frames per second on average was still a very respectable result though, with the build holding up strong. Grand Theft Auto 5 was a similarly positive story, the Founders RTX 4080 only losing out to other 4080 and 4090 models, and the other 4080 from GeekaWhat only providing very marginal gains at that. 187 FPS hitting the game cap on the 4090, with 166 on the 4080. Higher of course than the 3090 Ti, 6950 XT, and 3090 from last generation. In Marvel's Spiderman Remastered, the good results carried on rolling through with a much closer margin of error this time to the more expensive 4090. 117 frames per second on average, providing a gorgeous, very playable and enjoyable gaming experience. Move through into Valorant, and here we've got one surprise with AMD's 6950 XT, which sneaks slightly ahead, but at this point 400 frames per second, I mean there's not much in it. 447 FPS on average for the 4080, a little bit lower than the 502 FPS on average for the 4090, but you couldn't even see the difference between 200 and 300, let alone 440 and 502. Finally, to wrap things up, I also tested out Call of Duty's Modern Warfare 2 Remastered. At 1440p high with DLSS set to quality, we achieved 185 frames per second on average, while tuning the resolution settings up to 4K, dropped the frame rate to still a very solid 127. This was a good piece lower than the 4090, which got closer to that 200 FPS mark, but still impressive nevertheless. The 4080 then holding up well in a wide range of titles and providing class-leading 4K gaming performance, losing out only to Nvidia's own, more expensive RTX 4090. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to get subscribed. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, we'll see you in the next GeekaWhat video.